What is up, guys? So, back in January 15th, I premised a question to the rotary community and I said, what are some ECU features that you'd like to have broken down, explained in detail, and it can be any ECU, whatever you want me to do to elaborate in detail, we'll cover it, right? So, now that I thankfully have a better camera setup, a little bit better microphone, the goal here is the top two with 35% and 7% or rolling anti-lag and launch control. And while this can work on every ECU, at least modern stuff that I can think of, I figured it'd be easier just to show you on something that a lot of you guys are comfortable and familiar with, which would be something like the Haltech NSP software. So, bear with me, I'm going to flip this around and we're going to go through it together. So, two different cars, figured I'd make one for launch control and one for rolling anti-lag. So what we'll do first is the number one selected was rolling anti-lag. And I should preface this with what that is. This is, you are on a highway or wanting to have a set speed with a vehicle is locked at that pace or locked, you do different ways, but generally it's going to be locked in the highway at a 60 mile an hour roll or 40 mile an hour roll. You would hold down a momentary switch button and then it's going to do an ignition cut to then generate boost for the car, holding it at a given RPM. And then when you release that button, it lets the car go past that RPM with now added boost. So we're going to be adding a ignition table, an offset, or in this case for Haltech stuff, they actually have an exact ignition. So whatever we put in this table is going to be a direct value and not an offset value. Don't get that confused. On the fuel correction, that is an offset value. So ignition override, so that's a direct ignition value, and fuel correction is a added fuel to make boost. Okay, let's take a look. So I'm going to zoom this out real quick and I'm going to move you guys over there. And then what we've got here is vehicle function, rolling anti-lag. It can be found on here in vehicle functions. You'll put this on a momentary switch for wiring. So in this case, we did a pull-up. We have it on at 0.5 volt, off at 4.5 volts, momentary usage. There are multiple ways to do this control, but I prefer using the fixed RPM point. I do not have, I do not have any drag racing needs or anything like that to do speed when activated, RPM when activated, anything weird like that, or fixed speed, right? So if we have, let's say we have a front wheel speed sensor on a rear-wheel drive car, we could do a fixed speed to enable this, and then it's going to lock it at that speed. That works fine. Speed when activated could be, you can hit it at 50 mile an hour, 55, 60, whatever it is. Wherever you hit that button, it'll lock it there. This is really good for roll racing because now you're hitting it hopefully right at your spot and it will maintain exactly where you wanted to start it. This is going to have, driver mod, of course, is going to be important on this factor. That fixed speed would also work really well for that. But normally, for a street car, wanting to do highway stuff, I just do fixed RPM. Super reliable, easy to handle. And then I would do a cut, and I do not see a reason to do both ignition and injection at the same time, or ignition with injection above. I would not do an injection cut for this function. It just doesn't generate the boost. So No reason to waste your time doing something that doesn't work. Now, this is an ignition override table, okay? This means that whatever value I'm putting in here, these values should be the same values you're using for your actual VE table. So in vacuum here, I've got a curve, and this curve of these values, these are going to be what I'm using for my actual ignition curve on my ignition map, okay? So instead of doing that for the whole thing, we're going to go back, and once we're at 0 psi when we're trying to generate boost, we are ramping out ignition further than we would normally have it. And for instance, we could take this shape and we can cut down a percentage. Like in this case, we're probably cutting this in about 10-degree increments or 50% off or whatever we're trying to do in this situation. This one works to generate our target boost. If we go too far, it can be essentially not making enough power, but making all the boost in the world, because that combustion event is not carrying any power at the engine. So there will be a sweet spot to maintain a specific boost pressure. And you guys can see here that I replicated it on this 7 and 15 pound cell, because this car we actually want to start at mid-20s. So we're way down here when we go and start this off. We're at almost 0 degrees. So this car comes on and like a light switch, it's smacking at 24 pounds of boost and he lets go. So this is a very aggressive but very effective way of getting boost generated quickly. This car is running at EFR 9180. Next step would be fuel correction, right? This is going to be subjective, but really you should be looking at your wideband. It's not going to be able to pick up all of this perfectly because you're generating this crazy amount of boost and doing certain things very quickly, and it just does not always hold accuracy. So you do this to where it sounds good. If you're watching exhaust temperature, that they're not skyrocketing or doing anything odd. For the most part, this is going to be sound, feel, response. You're going to have to feel this out. And again, we're setting this up. These are now offsets, okay? Fuel correction, not an override. So these are adding to your main fuel V table that the car would be driving in. So if we're starting here at 24 pounds of boost, we're probably adding, and mine was set at 4,500 RPM, fixed limit. We're adding somewhere around here. So we'll say 12% or so to get 12% fueling to get a nice corrective sweeping instantly from 0 psi to 24 psi for rolling anti-lag. So the next one, besides that, was our launch control. Now this, I might even move over to the center real quick. Let's do. Oh, it's really not good. Bear with me. Okay. Launch control is the number 2 that was on that list. And this is going to be an input type. I normally do clutch switch because when you shift the car, I don't know, seems like a good way of doing it. You can have it always on, an actual dedicated launch switch, clutch switch, brake switch, or trans brake switch. Clutch is really simple, and it's usually pre-wired with Haltech plug and play or whatever harness is on the car to begin with. So clutch switch is pretty damn good to go with, and that's where I default. For setting these up, if someone's going to be a hood rat, set up, enable, timeout. Okay, so this is something to where if you're holding launch control, it's not going to let you hold it past 15 seconds, and then this is going to be Once you've exceeded a certain vehicle speed, it's going to shut off. Once you've validated it by having over a certain RPM threshold, it'll be enabled. And once you're past a cold coolant temperature, it'll be enabled. And I find that running a soft cut is just fine on ignition. For fuel correction, this is a correction. So again, just like the other car, now this is going to be an offset of your original table. And I actually pre-fuel this one in a vacuum cell, unlike the other one where I started it at 0 psi. So our launch control here will probably come in and sit right around here for this car. For ignition advance, again, I'm making all these values that we would for all the way up. Instead of at minus 7.4 in vacuum, I actually extend this one out to 0 psi. So this one, I run full timing for launch control, unlike rolling anti-lag, out to 0 psi in my load cell. And then I'm starting to pull timing, and I catch it without going too far into my boost. In this car, the way this gets onto rolling anti-lag is really, really smooth. Oh, sorry. Launch control is really, really smooth. And I found that if you have this setup real aggressive, like the rotary that I just showed prior, you will have issues. You're going to be trying to create too much boost too early. Engine's under-timed. It's actually dangerous. So never, ever, ever go too far in either direction. It's always having a sweet spot. This car in particular has wheel speed for the front and for the rear. And so for my end RPM, instead of having a singular point, I put it as a gear ratio, and then I have it as gear, and then I have vehicle speed, which is actually the input speed off of the front wheel speed sensor. So what this means is you'll be starting your launch 5,000 RPM here. Then you're going to have, right as you start to roll out, it's going to lower so it doesn't overshoot and spin the tires. And then as it's coming out, we're gaining an RPM up until we start moving. This is like a dummy version of traction control on top of your launch control. So doing a strategy like this works pretty well. This will always need to be adjusted per gear, and sometimes it's overly stepped. So for instance, this could be something like this, right? Or some gradient like that. So just to give you guys an idea of what that would normally look like. Let's make this back. There we go. So those are the top two requested. I will get to the rest of this list as we go. Hopefully it helps a little bit. I know there are so many complex ways of doing things. I try to treat engine tuning like a piece of art. So-and-so is going to do it differently. I'm going to do it differently. Doesn't matter. This is the best way that we can interpret how to optimize this engine setup for the owner's needs. And it's never going to be the same. You drive differently. They drive differently. I drive differently. That's the bottom line. So there is not a singular way to skin a cat. And just got to do what makes sense for the car at the time. And that has changed dramatically with ECUs and the way they're controlling engines in the last 10 years. So hope you guys like that one. Catch the next one. Cheers. Peace.